The following Bloodstream Media podcast is intended for informational and educational purposes only. Speak to your healthcare provider about all medical and treatment decisions.
Cheat Codes listeners, producer Patrick here. Cheat Codes is coming up right now, but wanted to give you a quick heads up. There are some times in the episode where there's a bit of weird background noise or music. We had some issues when recording a couple of the segments. Nothing that should be too distracting, but I did just want to give you that heads up so you didn't think you were crazy if you were hearing a little something in the background at times. So please enjoy Cheat Codes, a sickle cell podcast from doctors Mike and Amar.
Hello, warriors, and welcome back to Cheat Codes, a sickle cell podcast with me, Dr. Z.
And me, Dr. C.
Nice to have you back, Dr. C. We've got a good episode today.
Yeah, I'm excited about this one.
So we'll start with what's buzzing on social media, and today I'm going to get fired up. I'm going to give you a warning right now.
Getting mad at the New York Times.
Oh, yeah. And we'll hit our warriors with the word of the day. We have a really, really interesting interview guest today, and I'm pretty happy about it. So we're going to talk to the CEO of Emmaus Life Sciences, the makers of ENDARI.
Dr. Niihara.
Dr. Yutaka Niihara, exactly. And then we'll have Dr. Callahan finish up with really diving into a landmark trial that's going to change the way sickle cell disease is being treated.
Right, so we're going to talk about the trial that got ENDARI approved. And so sticking with the Star Wars theme, instead of the moon of Endor, this is the moon of ENDARI.
I love it. All right, guys, we're so happy that you're back with us for another episode of Cheat Codes.
All right, Dr. Z, it's that time again. It's time for what's happening now in social media. So where are we going to today? Are we going to Twitter or Snapchat or Facebook?
Actually, we're going to the New York Times.
Wait,
and
what? NewYorkTimes.com?
We are. We're going to nytimes.com. And I apologize in advance. I might get fired up. That doesn't happen very typically with me. I usually don't get that fired up. This one might set me off the edge. So in December, just after ASH, around ASH, at the tail end of ASH, an article comes out on nytimes.com.
I remember this.
You remember this? And I remember this because I'm sitting there with Katerina Minetti from Albert
Minetti,
Einstein, Dr.
from
Minetti.
New York City.
Oh, yeah. Great adult doctor. Pediatric doctor turned adult doctor. And she taps me on the shoulder and she says, "Amar, did you see this?" And I'm sitting there. We were at the president's reception at ASH, and I'm like looking at this article, and I can feel like my blood pressure climbing as I'm reading it. So the title is 2 New Drugs Help Relieve Sickle Cell Disease, period. But who will pay? ?
So they didn't answer that question?
They did, but not well. So this is by a lady named Gina Colada. And the reason that I tell you that is because...
You don't like Gina Coladas?
No, I like pina coladas. But Gina Colada, we had to reach out to over and over and over again to let her know that we weren't happy. And I'll tell you why. I'm going to read some quotes to you out of this. And I want to gauge you. I know you've already read this, but I want to make those feelings fresh again. So, at one point, Miss Colada says that each treatment is priced around $100,000 a year and must be taken for life. While it's not uncommon for a drug treating a rare disease to carry a high price, there are 100,000 people with sickle cell disease in the United States and millions more worldwide. To me, that sounds like she's saying it's a rare disease, but that's too many people with a rare disease for us to pay for this, is how I read that.
Yeah, and I remember looking at this, and I wanted to see how many drugs cost $100,000. And I found an article with the 100 highest cost drugs, and they were all more than that. So
absolutely,
$100,000 is a lot of money, but a lot of drugs cost in that range.
So then she interviews a few doctors, colleagues of ours who I'm not familiar with because we have not crossed paths. One of the physicians that was interviewed says, drug companies want us to ask this question. What are we willing to pay to ease the pain and the challenge of living with sickle cell disease? When it's your child facing the disease or your friend in unbearable pain, the answer is anything. But that's the wrong way to approach pricing. And the more appropriate question is, what amount should drug companies make on these drugs? Medicaid covers 50% of patients with sickle cell. Medicare covers another 15%. It's not clear how these programs will afford to pay for these drugs. I have a lot of feelings about that statement, but I want to hear yours first.
Yeah, I understand money is not infinite, and we can't just pay anything, any price for anything. But I think there are a lot of drugs that cost in this price range. I think our sickle cell warriors haven't had any options, and I think to have a company come into a space like sickle cell where there's a cemetery full of drugs that have failed in clinical trials, and take a risk and put in the resources to try to get a drug to market. If they do have success there, they need to recoup their costs.
Absolutely.
They need to be successful there.
Absolutely.
If nothing else, to encourage more people to come in the space.
That's
and
right.
make new drugs that can help our patients.
That's right. And honestly, Dr. Mike, I can say to you that in the three, we've both worked with all three companies. They really do invest back into the sickle cell community.
It's early days. Let's keep their feet to the fire. But so far, so
we
good.
got to keep pushing them on that, right? But I mean, they have invested themselves in this community, and I think the patients feel that too. And to me, that's huge. Actually, I want these companies to come into this space. New companies, be successful, invest in this community, help them build an infrastructure, give them resources that they otherwise won't get. I mean, without these companies there, where were the awareness programs? Where were the spotlights? Where were the news articles? I mean, none of this was happening, right?
And I don't think you see New York Times articles like this in a lot of other disease states. I mean, to their credit, they do occasionally have stories like this for other drugs, but often they cost multiple times what these drugs cost.
That's fair.
And it seems a little unfair to single out
Agreed.
new drugs in sickle cell and ones that aren't even on the high end compared to some other drugs.
Agreed.
For this kind of scrutiny and consideration.
Exactly.
And I always try to do what's best for my patient, and I don't take consideration of these costs.
That's right.
Somebody has to.
Yeah.
The insurance companies have to negotiate with the drug companies, and in a lot of ways, to me, that's fake money being shuffled around from one company I don't care about to some other company I don't care about. What I do care about is that my patient has
That's
access
right.
to these drugs.
Absolutely.
And so it's frustrating when you get press like this that might limit that.
So now the next controversial statement that comes up in this article is hydroxyurea, approved in 1998, costs about $1,000 a year and is approved for children. It can reduce the incidence of pain crises and strokes by half. Facts. This is true. We know this is true.
Hydroxyurea is a great drug.
Nobody's saying to replace hydroxyurea. We're not trying to get people off hydroxyurea. It is a great drug. But then they say, yet only 30% of sickle cell patients take it. So, they say in this article, should sickle cell patients be required to be on hydroxyurea before moving on to the newer, pricier treatment? Will insurance companies want to at least attempt treatment with hydroxyurea? Why should they jump to a very expensive drug as first-line therapy?
Yeah, so I this is a great frustration when you have payers making decisions for patients and doctors, and they're saying, this is required and you should do this first. I think hydroxyurea is a great drug. For most people, that's probably true. You should probably be on hydroxyurea.
And we offer hydroxyurea to everybody.
That should probably be your first choice. Not because it's cheap and that's great, but because it works and it can help you.
That's right.
But these aren't necessarily an or. These are often an and. So people on hydroxyurea are still having pain, still having unmet needs. And so you can add these on top of it. In addition, some people don't tolerate hydroxyurea. It's a safe drug, but some people don't tolerate it. And, a lot of our warriors have concerns about hydroxyurea.
Sure.
I spend most of my day telling them those are unfounded.
Yeah.
But I think, we're not going to convince everybody. And if people have those strongly held beliefs, we shouldn't be withholding these things that might help them because they're never going to take hydroxyurea. I think that's unfair and unreasonable.
Correct. And we talked about hydroxyurea in depth in episode 2. So you guys can refer back to that if you want to hear a little bit more about it. I completely agree with you. I mean, I think that it's ludicrous to say that this is an or therapy. That's a really good way to put it. This is these are and therapies. And a lot of our warriors have genotypes that don't get hydroxyurea.
That's right. That hydroxyurea is for people with SS or S beta 0. Our warriors with SC, S beta plus, other variants.
And when we cut our own experience, like our clinic with 700 patients, if we cut them down to how many of them are SS, S beta 0, it really excludes quite a number of people. So I think that's a very important consideration that gets forgotten. I mean, I've had these conversations with payers where they, during prior authorizations, where they say, well, we're not going to give you ENDARI because this patient hasn't been on hydroxyurea. And I have to say, this patient has hemoglobin SC, so I'm not going to put them on hydroxyurea. But those types of conversations are a big source of frustration. Now, one more item I want to go over here with you. One of the physicians interviewed for this New York Times article says, many adults with sickle cell disease have subtle or overt brain damage, which makes it difficult for them to fully understand, plan, or adhere to treatment.
It sounds like some physicians that the New York Times interview have some subtle brain damage that
I read that statement and I can't even believe that made it to print. That is unbelievable. I can't think of another disease space that gets scrutinized like this. The patients are being, this is literally insulting and trolling the patients.
I can see your face getting red again, Dr. Zadie.
I honestly, I read this and I was just like, these guys have lost all credibility. So I want to read a little passage to you of what I responded on my LinkedIn. Is that okay?
All right, now we're back to social media.
So here's what I wrote, Dr. Mike. I wrote, despite all the noise and nonsense, I will celebrate Oxbrita and Adakveo. I will celebrate that after a century, our forgotten and mistreated and stigmatized sickle cell patients have a shot at combination therapy. I will celebrate drugs that increase hemoglobin and reduce pain. And I will celebrate the companies who are in the community generating awareness and advocacy. I will celebrate not the sales of the drugs, but the currency of hope and possibilities, right? Which is all this is for this population. I mean, this is it's a whole new world, right? This is just a new terrain for them. So I made it clear that the New York Times is not where I go to get told how to feel about scientific advances, because quite frankly, they aren't in the trenches fighting day in and day out like we are, right? They don't deal with the disease. So while we know the 6-digit price point, we also see the cost of missed opportunities and, all the missed events. We see the cost of the stigma and the discrimination in the medical system. We see the cost of pain-related complications and organ damage. It's so much deeper than a wallet. This is generating possibilities for a disenfranchised group. So don't mind me while I celebrate that after 100 years of darkness, we have a glimmer of hope. And that's the only currency that ever matters, is hope. And that's how I felt in that moment. I know that might be a little bit of an emotional and unreasonable response, but that's truly...
I think it's perfectly reasonable. If I was on the LinkedIn, I would click the heart or the thumbs up.
We have to get you on the LinkedIn, man. That's not okay. All right. That is all I have for you today, Dr. Mike.
Thanks, Dr. Z.
All right. Okay, Warriors, back with my favorite segment, the Warrior Word of the Day. Dr. Mike, the word of the day is important today. Well, the word is not important, but it is an important word. This is really what affects sickle cell disease patients' lives, maybe the most, day to day. I think that this is probably the thing that keeps us busiest in regards to our patients day to day. This is what brings their life to a screeching halt and mostly lands them in the hospital.
So we're talking about pain.
We're talking about pain, and the term that we're going to be talking about more specifically is vaso-occlusive crises, or vaso-occlusive episode, depending on who you ask. Let's talk about that.
All right, so we got at least 4 words of the day. So vaso-occlusive crisis or vaso-occlusive episode. These are sort of broad terms that point to the underlying problem that's going on in sickle cell disease, where you have red blood cells blocking blood vessels. So vaso is for the blood vessel and occlusion is for blocking. So you have vaso-occlusion. And some people like the term crisis. Some people say they're not all a crisis, so we should call them episodes, but I think we mean the same thing. And some of them cause pain, so we might say VOC, that is a pain episode. But there are other kinds of VOC. You can have vaso-occlusion that's causing priapism or an erection that won't go away, or that's blocking up the spleen, and you can have splenic sequestration. You could have it in the abdomen and have an abdominal occlusive crisis. And these are usually acute, so they're things that happen all of the sudden. So you may have chronic pain, and some of that may be related to vaso-occlusion, but usually it's other things going on. But the acute pain, the pain that comes on all of the sudden, is really intense. That's usually from vaso-occlusion.
Okay.
And so when you have that vaso-occlusion and the blood vessels are getting blocked, the blood doesn't flow past the occlusion, and you can't get oxygen delivered to the tissue. And then what happens is what we call ischemic injury. Is when the blood gets all blocked up. You have that vaso-occlusion and the blood cells aren't getting past it, or can't get past the blockage, so they can't deliver the oxygen to the tissues past the blockage.
So ischemia really is describing a lack of oxygen.
A lack of oxygen, which is usually because of the lack of blood flow to that area. And so then the tissue starts to die, and that causes inflammation and pain and damages the tissue. And if it's a muscle or a bone, you'll get pain in that area. If it's a kidney, you have damage to the kidney, or if it's another organ, you have damage to that organ. So the vaso-occlusive crisis leads to this ischemic injury and damage. And we use different definitions for this. So a lot of times in clinical trials and drug studies, when we're trying to see if a drug works, we'll look to see if it can prevent vaso-occlusive episodes or vaso-occlusive crises.
That's right.
And so we'll say the VOCs on the drug were 4 and the VOCs on the placebo were 2, so the drug worked. So in order to do that...
The other way around.
Yeah, hopefully not that.
That'd
be a bad drug. Yeah, that'd be a bad drug. It was causing pain. In that case, we use a specific definition. We have to say, when something is a VOC and when it's not. And so people use different definitions. They might say it has to last for 2 hours, or it has to last for 4 hours.
Or you have to come to the ER or be admitted or something like that.
Exactly. So I think those definitions are important for trials, for studies, because we need to be accurate about things. But they're not so important in the clinic. If you're having pain at home, if it's not severe enough to go to the emergency department, if it doesn't last for 2 hours, you're still having pain. It's still a significant issue.
Absolutely.
So I think we need to capture that too.
And our friend and colleague, Dr. Wally Smith, eloquently described that the majority of these issues, particularly as it relates to pain, really do happen at home.
Yeah, with his Pisces study, he's captured a whole lot of patient diaries from home and looked at how people are managing their pain and how it's affecting them. And we do see, the vast majority of pain doesn't come to medical attention.
Exactly.
A lot of these VOCs are happening at home.
Right. And I think that's a key point, that you really can be having VOCs that happen in your home. And up to this point, really, clinical trials largely exclude those from sort of being measured.
Yeah, I think it's always been a challenge to measure things at home. I think we're getting a little bit better at it. And I think using the pain episodes that go to the hospital has been attractive to the companies because there's 197,000 emergency room visits for VOCs. That's almost 2 per patient per year. So it's
huge.
A very common thing, and it's a huge problem.
Absolutely.
And if you can help with that, presumably you would be helping with the things at home. But I think we do need to keep track of what's going on at home and do a good job about addressing those too, because some people don't like to come to the hospital even though they're having a lot of pain. And sometimes you're not having terrible pain that needs to go to the hospital, but it's still affecting your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, Warriors, there it is. Word of the day, VOC or VOE. I'm really excited today because we have a special guest who accepted to do an interview with us on the Cheat Codes podcast. Today we're going to be talking with Dr. Yutaka Niihara. And Dr. Niihara has been involved in patient care and research for sickle cell disease for most of his career, several decades. He's the principal inventor of the drug we're talking about in this episode, which is the patented L-glutamine therapy, which is now FDA approved for the treatment of sickle cell patients. He's the co-founder of Emmaus, principal investigator for LA Biomed at Harbor UCLA Medical Center, and professor emeritus of medicine at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. He has a vast experience with L-glutamine. In fact, he's the one who brought it to market and worked very hard to do so. And today we'll talk about his and the company's road to FDA approval for L-glutamine and what he wants patients to know about this therapy. Hi, Dr. Niihara.
Hello, Dr. Zaibi.
It is such a pleasure to have you on our podcast with me and Dr. Mike here.
Hi, Dr. Niihara.
Hi, Dr. Mike Callahan.
So Dr. Niihara, you have been quite busy over the last, really over the last 3 years, but you've been busy in this space for quite a long time. I wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit about how you ended up in the sickle cell disease space in the first place.
Well, just like both of you, during my training for hematology oncology, I was quite fascinated with sickle cell disease. Fascinated may not be the right word, but I was really taken by the severity and devastation that patients will go through. And my attention was shifted more and more towards sickle cell from solid and hematological tumor. Although, I did do my training in hematology and oncology, and I did not really slack off on the oncology part, but sure. I was quite interested in this disease. And the other thing that really scared me was that many of the patients were really written off as drug seeker. I cannot really blame other doctors because when I first saw sickle cell patients, that's how I thought they were too, because of the enormous amount of pain medication that they required. But as I got to know them more and more, no, this thing is real. And
Absolutely.
I'm talking about 1989 to 1992. In those days, we didn't even have hydroxyurea.
Right.
We really felt like, we have to do something for this. Not that I didn't think I could do too much for them except to, treat each patient with the best I can. But there had to be something that had to be done. So anyway, that's how I got started with the sickle cell disease.
You're right. There's a lot to accomplish, and there's a long road ahead of us. But you guys have really put a flag on the map with ENDARI.
That's really nice of you to say that. But we were just taking things one day at a time, just like you do. I was just fortunate to join a laboratory that was doing a lot of work on red blood cells, and the sickle cell disease was one of the topics. And I was able to pursue this, not knowing where it might really lead. But everything that I was doing was interesting on daily basis. So, we kept doing it. So, it's like I'm really glad you say that, but it's accumulation of days' work.
Sure, sure. So I took the liberty of going into PubMed and going through your publications, and I see, at least from this, that your scholarly activity in L-glutamine looks like it started in 2005. But tell me the story of how L-glutamine came to the forefront for you.
My first publication was like in 1994 with the glutamine.
Oh wow. Okay.
Our laboratory was working on the pentose phosphate shunt because we really wanted to tackle this hyperoxidative state in red blood cells caused by this sickle cell mutation. And not just us, but many people felt that if we can somehow reduce this oxidant stress, we could reduce the injury to red blood cells. And our laboratory focused on this pentose phosphate shunt because we knew that that was a direct reduction mechanism for the oxidized hemoglobin. I'm talking about the G6PD going down to NAD, going down to cytochrome, which passes the electron over to the hemoglobin. When we looked at that, we noticed that there was some issues with the NAD. NAD is, as you know, is a nucleotide. It's very much like a nucleotide in DNA, but it's a little bit different in that it has a nitrate group. And then this is actually utilized in many areas in Krebs cycle or in the glycolytic pathway. Sorry for getting a little technical here. We noticed immediately that the NAD was being used up so quickly, and we also noticed that red blood cells trying to produce more NAD. And this work was primarily done by Dr. Zerez, my mentor. And then we were trying to look at the way to improve this NAD's activity because it was just getting used up so quickly. And we have noticed that it's not that it cannot produce more NAD, but because it's utilized so quickly, its precursors were just being used up, and the precursor happens to be glutamine.
I see.
To get to that point, we had to do many different assays to, really pinpoint that it was glutamine. So one of my first work was to see what the activity or the transport of glutamine into red cell was like. And we have noticed that sickle red blood cell had like almost 10 times faster uptake of glutamine through active transport compared to what we call high reticulocyte control.
I see.
Where is this going? So we did few other studies, and sure enough, glutamine was utilized to form more NAD. And one of the hallmark of our laboratory was NAD redox potential because this NAD redox potential was really coined by Dr. Zerez, and we knew how to measure NAD redox potential. And before application of glutamine into these red cell, NAD redox potential was really low, meaning like it was its capacity to counteract the oxidant stress was really low. But then once we added glutamine, NAD level went up and NAD redox potential went up very nicely to adequately counteract this oxidant stress. So this was my work in mostly 1990s, and then some of the laboratory work, and we hypothesized, and we had pilot studies in mid to late 90s, and actually gave glutamine to patients, pharmaceutical grade glutamine, and the patients start to feel so much better. Patients who used to get hospitalized every week or every other week, all of a sudden they didn't have to go to the emergency room for narcotics at all. So,
Wow.
and we monitored them for 3 months, and these were just four of my most severe patients. And said, wow, we have something. And we start to see improvement in their blood smears, and their blood cells were less sticky. So I just put these information together, and the National Institutes of Health gave us a grant, and that was my first national level grant. And then that was followed by orphan drug grant from FDA. Throughout, the FDA and NIH gave me a lot of good advice. I used to call them or visit them all the time. How do I go from here and so forth? I was quite naive, and then they were quite helpful. That's how we got to the phase 2 clinical trial and the phase 3. Yeah.
Wow. So when did you decide to jump in with 2 feet? And because one thing I really like about my job is I'm able to do research, not as impressive as this kind of research, but you hope that can make a big difference for a lot of people. But I also like the retail, seeing individual patients and working with them. When did you decide to jump full into the research and really try to move it into clinical trials and patients and out into industry so that patients would have access to this?
Okay, Dr. Mike, that's a good question. Up till like late 1990s, of course, we were mostly basic scientists, and we did few things to endorse the fact that glutamine is clinically efficacious. But then at that point, I'm also a clinician too. We have to do something for the patient, and it's glutamine after all. The FDA had counseled us and told us that if you're going to pursue, you really should stick to the pharmaceutical grade glutamine, because health food grade can be irregular, and they don't get monitored as much, and it could cause some toxicity. So we stuck to this, and I just wanted to bring this to patient as quickly as possible. So first thing I did actually was to look for industry. But year 2000, no industry was interested in orphan disease, and especially sickle cell disease. So I could get nowhere. So then, just to get more grant in the form of business, small business grant. Um, at the time, our laboratory or the institute was called LA Biomed at Harbor UCLA Medical Center. They encouraged me to start up a paper company, virtual company, so that we can get the small business grant. And with that small business grant and also the orphan drug grant by the FDA, we had enough money to get the clinical trial started. So, those, like a little over $1 million, and that doesn't sound a lot, but that was a lot of money to me, and I was so naive that that
Sure.
didn't get us anywhere. But the thing is that we just got started, and then for some reason, once we got started, we couldn't stop. So I just went around my family and friends of friends, and then we gathered enough investment to finish the phase 2 trial. Um, and once we finished phase 2, then we had to go to phase 3. And by phase 2 data was good enough that we can move on to phase 3. And even in phase 2, we had a statistical significant decrease in hospitalization and stuff. We missed statistical significance just by a little bit on the incidence of crisis. But that was good. We talked with the FDA, and we worked out the statistical analysis plan, and we worked on the power, and they're very nice about it, especially
Sure.
the Office of Orphan Drug Designation. And then we moved on to a phase 3 trial. That was in 2009. As you know, by 2014, we finished the study, and we finished with 2,030 patients, and the data was published in the paper that you saw.
Right, right.
In the New England Journal of Medicine.
Your story is remarkable for many reasons, but I really get inspired by your persistence and perseverance to follow through on this idea. I mean, really, this is like a almost 30-year arc now So that's a really important lesson to people, I think, in really believing in ideas that you think are important. Thank you for that inspiration.
Yeah, it's not such a grand thing that I did. I mean, I was so naive that I could get my work done in maybe 5 to 7 years. It just took longer than I had expected. If I knew that it was going to take essentially, like you said, like altogether maybe since 1992, so it's like 28 years. I probably didn't have courage to do it. But the patients who supported us and the investors who supported us and many clinicians who gave me encouragements. These were the reasons why I could continue. And yeah, we were really happy when we could, show to the world that we have now new treatment. We believe that it's effective, safe, and in a way practical.
Wonderful, wonderful. So we the last question I have for you, Dr. Niihara, is, we obviously in our clinic have discussions about ENDARI in multiple patient rooms almost every day. What I think is really interesting is, with your clinician background, how would you explain ENDARI to a patient who's hearing about it for the first time?
Thank you for asking me this question and always discussing ENDARI as a part of your discussion, Dr. Zidi. This is how I explain. Sickle cell disease have this vicious spiral. In other words, the root cause is this mutation, and this mutation causes abnormal changes in the content of red blood cells, and that change causes injury to red blood cell, and that causes inflammation, and the inflammation in the form of something called oxidation. And this oxidation further damages the red cell, and then it causes further deformation. That's the vicious spiral. I just tried to explain vicious spiral, which you already know.
Right.
And
Right.
we wanted to stop vicious spiral at some point, and actually there are many targets. We decided to target this what we call oxidation. Oxidation is a form of inflammation, and by doing so, try to limit or slow down or even stop this vicious spiral. So that's kind of like a long-winded version. If you want to make it even simpler, explaining to patient, this ENDARI really reduces oxidation of red blood cells caused by the root cause. So,
That's right.
and in case of sickle cell, there's too much of this oxidation process, and we are reducing this by we are reducing this oxidation or inflammation by activating body's own system of antioxidants.
Wonderful, wonderful. That's a really nice explanation. Well, Dr. Niihara, I really once again want to thank you for your time today, and it's an absolute pleasure to be in a disease space where dedicated individuals like yourself are working hard to better the state for sickle cell disease patients.
And yeah, thanks for sticking with it and getting us our first new sickle cell drug in 20 years, so we have something we can treat people with.
Well, thank you for this opportunity, Dr. Zaidi and Dr. Callahan, and thank you for the work that you do.
Okay, we'll talk to you soon.
All right, take care. Okay, bye-bye.
All right, Dr. Mike, I appreciate you so much for breaking down these seminal trials in our red cell research reviews that we've been doing on cheat codes. You have a really nice way of taking really complicated things and making them interesting and tangible. So I appreciate having you. I learn a lot during these segments.
I do too.
So for this episode, we're going to focus on ENDARI and the phase 3 trial that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. Earlier in this episode, we spoke with Dr. Niihara, who is the CEO, inventor, founder, however you want to put it, of L-glutamine and its use in sickle cell disease. And we're just going to dive in a little bit more with Dr. Mike as our Sherpa, sort of guiding us and get into the meat of why the FDA said that this drug was okay to use in sickle cell disease patients. Dr. Mike, can you help us out?
Yeah, I'm glad to. So this is a study, again, that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. I think our last 6 episodes have been things published in the New England Journal of Medicine. We'll have to branch out a little bit, maybe. This is a phase 3 trial of L-glutamine, or now it's called ENDARI, in sickle cell disease. And Dr. Niihara, who we spoke with earlier,
That's right.
was the first author. This was published in New England Journal in July 2018, so it's relatively recent. And this looked at L-glutamine in a multi-center, so again, lots of different hospitals, randomized. People either got the placebo or they got the L-glutamine, and double blind, so they didn't know and their doctor didn't know which one they were getting. And phase 3 trial, so again, this is a big trial attempting to really prove that this drug is effective. And they used a dose of 0.3 grams per kilogram of body weight, given twice a day, or a placebo. They did this over a period of 48 weeks, and their primary endpoint was, again, to look at pain. Just to take a step back, I think Dr. Niihara did a really good job of summarizing this earlier, so I'll be brief. L-glutamine is an amino acid. It's ubiquitous, meaning it's everywhere, and we need more of it than we have during times of stress. So when cells are stressed, or when our body is exposed to an oxidative stress, as is often the case for our sickle cell warriors who are having pain episodes or occlusive events, there's not enough glutamine around to make the things to fight off that stress, that antioxidants, that NADH, that fuel to make that to help. So that was the idea about why it might work.
Dr. Mike, would it be reasonable to say that L-glutamine is like, the way that I sort of think about it is like, we have materials that our body needs to build, and L-glutamine is like a Lego, right? It's like a brick or a Lego that is used to build that material.
Yeah, I like that. It's it's an amino acid, and so our body's made mostly of proteins, and the proteins are basically a combination of 20 amino acids. So those are like the little
different
Lego
color Legos.
Pieces.
Yeah, okay.
It's like that Lego movie where the guy's building on the
It's a
fly.
great movie, honestly.
It's very funny.
It really is.
I think another thing I should say about glutamine is it's also made into another amino acid called arginine. And arginine is really important for making something called nitric oxide.
That's a big deal.
That helps our blood vessels keep things from sticking to them and stay loose.
And the balance of nitric oxide in sickle cell disease is wacky.
For sure. You have that free hemoglobin that scavenges it and causes damage, and it's not delivered as well by the red blood cells.
Right.
So that's another way this drug might work. With that idea in this study design, they enrolled patients who were at least 5 years old, a total of 230 patients up to 58 years old, and they were randomized 2-to-1. So,
what does that mean?
So they flipped a coin, but the coin had 3 sides, I guess. I don't know how you do that. But 2 out of every 3 people who got randomized got the glutamine, and 1 got the placebo.
Okay.
So most of the people on the study got the glutamine. They measured the average number of pain episodes over that 48-week period. And in the L-glutamine group, it was 3 pain episodes.
Okay.
And in the placebo group, it was 4 pain episodes.
Okay.
So about a third fewer pain episodes. And they also looked at the time to have your first pain episode. And that was also different.
Improved.
It was improved in the L-glutamine group compared to the placebo.
And I also think that they had some, if I'm not mistaken, some hospitalization data too that showed that there were maybe less hospitalizations when you're on ENDARI.
That's right, and less time in the hospital.
And less acute chest, even.
Exactly. So they were able to show, an improvement in a lot of clinical endpoints. And again, in this trial, you could be on hydroxyurea if you had been on a steady dose. And about 2/3 of the patients were on hydroxyurea. And the benefits that were seen in the people on hydroxyurea, as well as the people who were not on hydroxyurea. They had people who had anywhere from 0 to 10 pain episodes, with about 80% in the 2 to 5 range. Again, across all of those demographics, they had benefit. They also had patients with sickle cell SS, S beta 0, and S beta plus in the trial. So it's approved for all of the different types of sickle cell. So this led to our first sickle cell drug approval in 20 years. Of the 3 drugs we've talked about recently, this was the first one to market.
It's amazing. Really a landmark. I mean, just a huge, huge thing.
To have a new drug in sickle cell
really,
after all that time.
Yeah.
And it comes as something like sugar packet. A powder that you can mix in juice or applesauce or yogurt and have with breakfast and dinner, because you have to take it twice a day. And it's a medicine you take continuously to prevent.
Yeah. So, one interesting thing is that so out of the 3 new medications, this is one that we can start in our younger patients. This one is approved from age 5 upwards.
Right. So Oxbryta is 12 and up, and Adakveo is 16 and up. So for that group of patients who are 5 to 12, we have hydroxyurea and we have ENDARI.
And, I think that, again, we reference our friend and colleague, Dr. Katerina Miniti. She wrote the editorial in the same issue of New England Journal of Medicine about ENDARI. Its title is L-Glutamine and the Dawn of Combination Therapy for Sickle Cell Disease. And that's so true. But it leaves us with so many compelling questions now. Right now, when we have patients that have access potentially to 4 drugs, how do we combine them? Do we combine them? Which patients get combination therapy? How do we monitor combination therapy? What is the safety of combination therapy? There's all these very interesting and compelling points that I think are going to become really important now. And my excitement and fear, we only have one shot to do this, and I really hope that we as a community, as a provider community, make sure that we set ourselves up to really rigorously analyze and follow cohorts that are getting treated with multiple therapies now.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and it's an exciting time. I think we're starting to have some tools that can help with sickle cell disease. And I think, I really liked the title of Dr. Miniti's editorial there, the dawn of combination therapy. And I think it harkens back to, the 60s and 70s when our colleagues who treat leukemia
certainly started
to have drugs, and they had methotrexate, and they had 6-MP, and they had steroids, and they had asparaginase, and they still use those drugs, but they figured out how to use them right, and they went from 0% cures to 80-90% cures
exactly
by just using those same drugs in the right combinations, in the right ways, at the right doses, at the right times.
That's right.
And they did that by cooperating, by forming big groups, by collecting meticulous data and following outcomes over long periods of time. And I think it's our duty to do that here.
I agree. Yeah, I think that's very well said. Thank you so much for going through the data of the phase 3 trial for L-glutamine. There you have it, folks. Straight from the expert's mouth. Dr. Mike, thank you again.
Thank you.
All right, well, that wraps up another successful episode.
That was great. It was great to talk to Dr. Niihara.
Yeah, we had some star power on the show. That was kind of neat. I hope you guys will share this podcast with people who you think could benefit from learning a little bit more about sickle cell disease, which really is everyone.
Follow us on Twitter @Humagineer.
And @Dr. Z Sickle Cell.
And look out for Dr. Z's TikToks.
They're coming. At some point, they're coming. I promise you that. All right, guys. Stay with it. Stay healthy. Be well with sickle cell. And we will catch you next time.